Harvard Divinity School.
A Humanitarian System on Life Support, April 23rd, 2025.
My name is Perlai Tor, and I am a Master of Divinity candidate for 2026 and a Certificate of Religion and Public Life candidate for 2025. I'm also a graduate assistant in the Religion and Public Life. Before we start, I will begin with a quick land acknowledgement. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Welcome to our panel today, and thank you for being here. Religion and Public Life is dedicated to the service of a just world at peace. We work with a dynamic method that has religious literacy at its core and brings in critical analysis to understand and challenge systems of inequity. Our focus on just peace building recognizes that a peace without justice is not sustainable. The goal of RPL programming is to bring analysis from experts, including academics and practitioners, and those living in inequitable systems, and offer some ways forward to build a more just world. The program is currently led by Interim Director Dean David Holland, and previously by Diane L. Moore, former Associate Dean for RPL. This panel, like all our programming, would not be possible without the support of our team, including Hussein, Reem, Hillary, Anna, Natalie, Tammy, Hisham, Rochelle, and Delise. Thank you to all of them. And now for the introduction to the panel we're all here for today. We know that peace without justice is not sustainable, and that lasting transformation requires deep attention to context, power, and lived experience. Today's conversation embodies that mission. As we face a moment of profound uncertainty in the global humanitarian sector, amid the collapse of major institutions, increasing climate disasters, and persistent violence, we're called to ask not just what needs to change, but how and who must lead that change. As the global humanitarian sector faces unprecedented challenges, the need for bold leadership and new models of response has never been more urgent. This panel today brings together two extraordinary leaders who have spent their entire careers responding to crisis with courage, clarity, and vision. Through their stories and analysis, we hope to not only offer insight into the challenges at hand, but also inspiration for what a more just and responsive humanitarian future could look like. So I will start by introducing our two panelists here today. We welcome to the conversation today Dr. Valerie Bemo. Dr. Bemo is the Deputy Director for Emergency Responses at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she has led some of the organization's most significant global interventions over the past 12 years, including responses to the Haiti earthquake, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, and the Nepal earthquake. With more than 20 years of experience in humanitarian response, public health, and sustainable development, she has also played a key role in shaping agricultural reform strategies in West Africa. Prior to the Gates Foundation, she served in senior roles with the International Rescue Committee across the Democratic Republic of Congo and West Africa. A trained physician and public health expert, Dr. Bemo is a passionate advocate for locally driven, community-centered humanitarian leadership that fosters lasting resilience and equity. We also welcome Mike Delaney to the conversation today. Mike Delaney is the Humanitarian Action Fellow at Harvard Divinity School's Religion and Public Life program and a seasoned leader in international development and emergency responses. Over a 25-year tenure with Oxfam America, he led major humanitarian responses across the globe and has consistently championed local leadership as central to effective ethical aid. He later served as executive director of Perkins International and is the founder of Crescendo International, a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening local humanitarian leadership in the face of escalating global crises. Mike brings to his work a strong commitment to justice, faith-informed leadership, and sector transformation, mentoring the next generation to navigate and reimagine humanitarian action through religious literacy and ethical engagement. So with those wonderful introductions and lengthy bios, I would love to open today with laying down some of the groundwork and the history of how we got to this current moment that we are in. This is not the first time that humanitarianism has been in trouble. So I was wondering to open, could you both share what for you it means when we say the words in our provocative title of the panel today, that humanitarian aid is on life support? So if either of you want to start with that small question, feel free to.
Valerie, you want to jump in first?
Okay. I think this is really an interesting question. But one thing I know is that for us to start thinking about today or tomorrow, we have to start to see where we're coming from and why we are here. And I think before we start even looking at, and of course, sometimes it's a sign that you're getting a bit too experienced, too old. It's like when you start looking, I remember one day, but I think I want to just take into like, where's humanitarian? Why we call it humanitarian? What is that term? Because I think it's a lot of differences. First, the term humanity is about humanity. And starting from that is a things that is not a sector, but it's a way of being. First, to start with, the humanitarian, it should not be dedicated to some people, to something. It's about how we are compassionate, how we support each other, how we believe in the other. And I think that is where I wanted to start from. And if we look at even how that have started, when we were looking at history, Solferino, at that time there was war, people fighting, but they all agree it was really in the 1800s when people were fighting, but it was clear that when you have people that are some soldiers that are on the ground, people have to stop to let people come in, remove them, go and continue. It was almost a kind of like, it's humanity. Yeah, we fight for maybe ideas, but it doesn't mean that we have to destroy each other. And I think that is how it started. And it was really people who were coming and support this, clean the wounds, making sure that people, and they were respected, they were acknowledged, they were part of that. And then we have evolution, and then we have big war like the First World War, where people say, okay, we lost the humanity, there's nothing good in the world anymore. And then we recover a little bit, and it's like Second World War, and then it's getting even worse, and then the world say, okay, we need to do something differently. And then we start creating a system. That is where most of these non-profit NGOs, the UN, we need to find a way where we can regulate a little bit how we behave, because we cannot just count on our humanity. We need to have a system to regulate that. That is how it started. And then I'm just coming to the evolution, and I'm sure Mike can come back to some of this evolution. And we evolved. You have the Cold War, where it was a power dynamic. We evolved to the Biafra, where we like, how did we let that happen? We were silent and let things happen. And we need to be a bit more reactive. We need to be more stepping on the Biafra in the 70s in Nigeria. And then we had the Rwanda crisis, where we like, oh my goodness, even if we react first, a genocide happened, we react, but we were so badly prepared that actually our response create more damage, because of our response, we brought people in the place where they was not supposed to be. We didn't have any rules and things like that. And that is where the standard came out to like, okay, even if you respond, we need to have equality, because we can make more harm by wanting to go. It's not enough to be humanity. You need to have a professional way of doing it. And then we evolve. The world evolves, the things evolve. We have more standard. It become even a profession. People get trained for that. We get a system. This is the golden age of the humanitarian, where it become like a career. There's a lot of funding. There's a lot of interest. And then we start having the realization that it become like a career, so much that the big international start doing as a career. It's not anymore about the humanity, it's about the business. Then that business become like so heavy that actually the people locally are feeling like completely undermined for that. Then I think that is where the localization started to say, hey, actually you need to give the space for people locally. They are there, the first one, they are there. And I think, and now we are in another another part of the time of humanitarian that where with the funding reduction, with the increase of needs, we have more crises, we have more climate change, and because the way we have been doing as a population, the world and things, it become more and more, but there's less and less money. And I think we are in that point now where it's like, how do we do more, better with less? And that is the question that we have to ask ourselves now. But I'm curious, Mike, what do you think?
That was great. You just took us through almost 200 years of history in 5 minutes. I think, you know, when we think about the history of humanitarianism, I mean, in many ways, humanitarianism has been around forever, really, and it's based in lots of religious tradition, right? And it's about how we treat each other. And that starting point, and that Valerie focused in on in 1859, that Battle of Solferino, this man, Henry Dunant, happened to be walking, you know, and this huge battle was taking place, ended up leaving 35,000 people dead on the battlefield, and you know, other thousands of war wounded just there. And so they started doing this, just organizing as communities, and mostly women coming out and helping the war wounded, just, you know. And this guy Henry Dunant, he not only, you know, focused in on this and organized and gave care to these either dying or saving lives, he then wrote about it, and from that, it was so, he wrote about it in such detail and so moving back in Geneva, where he was from, that they then created the first, you know, they convened and created the first Geneva Conventions. And so from there came the International Federation of the Red Cross. But it was all revolving around this concept of neutrality, impartiality, humanity, objectivity. And I think, like, those were the key principles that have been, the humanitarian sector has been trying to implement over time. But as we, you know, Valerie went through this history of the rise and fall of how humanitarianism, you know, was in its heyday after the Second World War, where people were respecting the Geneva Conventions. And now, you know, we're seeing, you know, are we really living in a period of humanity? And like when civilians are being bombed as you know, as targets and attacked as targets, and so a lot of these concepts that were kind of driving the humanitarian sector have been slowly eroded. And I think, you know, as we look at this history and you know, talk about the funding and the, you know, the need for greater humanitarian aid now because of climate change, because of the many conflicts, but then seeing the major cut and the moving from humanitarianism, you know, being non-partial, being neutral, being based on need. Like when it moves into the political arm of a government, is it really humanitarian? Is it really humanitarian aid? And that's where it's not only a crisis, a financial crisis, but it's also a humanitarian crisis because we're taking the humanity out of the response. It's becoming transactional.
Yeah, and I think if we even look at it, we just building on that, there's more and more humanitarian people who are killed because they are doing their job. We see attack on children, we see attack on women, they become target of the war. When before it was soldier fighting for each other, it was almost like a norm to not touch the civilians. But now there's no limit. In addition, we created with humanity, we start creating a savior approach, like the top down. And I usually say to people, it's not because somebody has been affected or lost everything that they lost who they are and their dream and their fear and their hope. They still have that. But we have to stop treating them because they lost their home, then they are nothing. And I think we start feeling like we are saviors, we are gods, and as humanitarian, and go there to people, and we start telling them what they need, what they should do, what they do. And I think that for me is where we transform our humanity to our kind of like almost entitlement. And then we the the knowers, and it's kind of like we move it a little bit and we start respecting the people locally. We start putting stuff that they may not need. We don't ask them. We don't check with them what is important. We bypass everything with the name of humanitarian. And I think we stop giving the people the dignity. And because we're doing that, it becomes more expensive, of course, because you have to fly people out. You have to bring big commodities that people may not even need. And it become like the cost of doing business increase tremendously. And it's like, okay, is it a different way of doing it? How do we make sure that the people are sitting at the table, not under getting the crumble, but being part of defining the problem and finding solution? And I work in a lot of time, went to a lot of refugees, a lot of places. What makes the difference with people is that when you listen to them, those who made it is those who feel like they still have their dignity and they can still contribute. They don't see themselves as victim, they see themselves as participant contributor. And I think, how do we tap in that? And I think that is where thinking about localization become an important piece of how do we start thinking and how do we do things differently?
Yeah. So Valerie is very diplomatically saying, okay, we started this program in a battlefield, providing humanitarian aid under these principles, and there was no budget 150 years ago. And now, particularly after World War II, was when it really started to grow. It was in the millions of dollars, the budget for humanitarian aid. And then in the 1970s, it was in the hundreds of millions. And then it grew to the billions. And 2012, it was 10 billion. And 2019, it was 24 billion. Now it's close to 50 billion. And so it grew, and it grew very centralized. That's what Valerie is saying. It's like it grew very the opposite of an iceberg. I don't know. It was, had the majority was the structure and the organizations, and in central locations, and the amount getting to people in need was a fraction. And not only that, it was, it kind of evolved, like it kept on growing, but nobody ever really designed it. It just kept on, being built on top of each other. So you had these, very centralized structures around the world, and they were traveling to places to provide humanitarian aid. And so, so the design never really had a
Cultural.
yeah. And so that's another thing. And so I think what Valerie was getting there to, that yes, this is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity.
Belly, I think we took a long to respond to your simple question. You see, it was a question.
This is a great thing. This means that there's lots to talk about. I have so many thoughts, and I'm curious, because we're really trying to get at right now is what is the root of the problem? Where did it go wrong, right? Where and then from diagnosing that, what are the opportunities, right? If we address the root of the problem. And I heard you, Valerie, mention this idea of like a savior mode, and diagnosing or telling people what they need. And I have very limited knowledge on this, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but I have to immediately think of, missionary efforts, because Mike also mentioned, women, and women primarily leading this. I have to think of missionary efforts where the men were preaching, and quite often it was the women building schools, building houses, and introducing these sort of Western systems. And so my mind is also going to how is the colonialism aspect playing into this? And I think that's an important thing to introduce. And can we detach that from the money piece of it, which Mike mentioned, which is also very important? Or are those so linked to each other that becomes a messy game? I'm assuming probably the latter, but I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, and if that really shows, is the humanitarian thing at the root already an issue, or was there ever a point in which it wasn't harmful and it was good? Because you're also showing, both of you, examples of really beautiful moments of humanitarian action. I guess what I'm wondering is it at its core, or is it different?
I think a bit all of the above, but even today, humanitarian is still beautiful. And I think that's why we are still here. I'm still passionate about it, despite 30 years of doing that. It's not so much about the humanitarians, it's about the system that evolve and that we put in place. As human beings, we just try to create stuff based on the evolution of the world. That's why I took the long way. But you are right. Because when you see that long way, there was the World War II, there was the colonialism, there was the post-colonial, there was all that. It's so intricate in the same thing as Mike said. There's a mix of religion, because all religions say you need to help. It's a mix of political, because no money is for free. Nothing is free. There's always something behind. Yes, you can do things, but there's always, as Mike said, the transactional. Then it's kind of like, even after the World War II, it was the Cold War. It was about control. It's also, then the more you put, the more you know where it is. And there was a little bit of also control. This was a colonial. And that is where I say it's the top down, or the Western knowing, doing, having the money, start imposing what it should be. And there's not necessarily space. Then I think you are right. It's a little bit of all that. And that's why it's so delicate. But the core of be compassionate, I don't even use the word humanity, about compassion, because I do a lot of work now about this term compassion, because the compassion is different from the saviors in the way that the compassion listen to the other person, put space, and acknowledge that the other person have suffering, but also have a dignity, have a soul, and can express, and that the suffering doesn't mean that it alienates you for desire or for wanting to. Then I think that is where we start losing it, because we want so much, we care so much, we want so much to give, that sometimes it's almost, when you have a kid, you want so much to make everything so good that it's not always everything that you give is not always the good things. Sometimes you have to like, no, maybe not. I think it's that mix, intricate, that's why it's so complex, because you have a little bit of everything. But I also give the benefits of the doubt that most of the people enter come with a good heart. A lot of the people have a good heart, but the system of creating that big things that is different to differentiate the good heart with the system or a career, because there's a lot of people who become a career, it become a business, it become like, and then it gives you a good sense of like, I'm doing something amazing. Oh my goodness. And everybody's telling you, oh, you're so good because you give your time. You know, it's a kind of that intricate um energy, but at the core it's not bad. But it's how do we help the system tap in it, because the people there also, the first responder as a people, we saw in Myanmar, the people who start removing people under the crumble were the local people with their hands. That is humanitarian. But we tend to not consider that, we will not even count that the people who come, jump, go under the rubble, grab people, come and distribute food to all their neighbors. This is humanitarian as well. But we tend to not count that. Because we come with our money, that is where humanitarian starts. No. Day to day, then how do we give that space? How do we recognize that local themselves, because they also want the best for themselves? Maybe Mike?
Yeah,
Any
that was great. I'm glad you brought that in about, Myanmar. And I mean, we've seen it all along, through the years of different crises where people are on the front line immediately. And, even recently in the DRC, when there were, after these major cuts, there were 500,000 people displaced in the DRC, and there wasn't any, most of the aid programs had to stop, and they were letting people go, and yet the communities, the people there, were taking people into their homes and letting them stay under their roof and providing them water, and so over years, we've seen those kinds of actions. Whether it's in northern Mozambique, where refugees are flowing and staying with local communities, and the situation, the earthquake after Haiti, we saw that for weeks, local people pulling out the rubble and and freeing up local people. So that is that humanitarian spirit is alive and in it's present. And I think that phrase humanitarianism is so powerful. Like, as Valerie started off saying, it's like a way, right? It's a pathway, and it's because it means every life has value. And if you live that, if you believe that, then that changes your worldview. And so it's not by, only serving the countries that you're allied with, or where there's needs of where your government has a friendly relationship with another government. It's where the greatest need is. And so that's why it can be so powerful, but it does get mixed up. One of the things Diane Moore says, get comfortable with the messiness. There's a lot of messiness in there. There's this, from the very good heart that Valerie says people are coming forward with, but it's like there's a lot of complications in the process of humanitarianism, and that's where, thinking about the future and thinking about this crisis, because it's been built and it's evolved and it hasn't really been designed, it's really just grown. Maybe now is a time where we can start to really think about, okay, what is it that we want?
Is it and this is a silly question perhaps, but is it possible to remove the humanitarian aid from politics? Is that ever possible? Because if what you're both suggesting is that at its core, it's almost a philosophy. It's this compassion, it's this recognition of humanity, it's this recognition of the value of every single life. And yet we know that everyone comes from their own political, their own religious upbringing that will color how you answer those questions, unfortunately. It often isn't that we recognize everyone as equally human because of the ways that we've been brought up and the systems that we're embedded in. And so do you both see a way that you can actually detach humanitarian aid from politics? Yeah.
What is politics? I was said, what is politics?
Great
We're all
question.
political animals, right,
How
Erica?
even in your house, you're making politics. How
Mhm.
you respond for me, politics also is a mindset. It's kind of like how do you react to a situation? But in the politician way of talking about, can you remove it from the interest? From monitoring, because it's more than political, because we put political, but more than political is the economic gain. And it start being used for that type of, because when you say political, even that political, it was not just because I want to be political. Yes, it's a lot of that, but a lot of things like what is my interest? What can I gain out of it? It become a transactional. And I think that is where we become complexity. It's like that transactional way, because when we even say political, when people, some country go to some places, it's because in return, there's a lot of the time, not all, a lot of the time, there'll be something they can extract from there. There'll be some few time you will have a religion war where it's really about the religion, but the religion is usually a small piece. You see that in small micro war, micro thing, but the big one is usually coming back to money and power.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I very much agree with that. I think that like religion many times gets used as a justification around conflicts, and the idea that the separation, your question about the politics, I think it is possible to separate it from government. And ironically, governments have the responsibility for people within, their sovereign area. And so they are ultimately, responsible. And so if people are displaced, or there's a drought, or if there's a flood, they should be the ones, responding. If there are refugees, they are the ones who have an obligation to respond. So that's their obligation as a government. And so within that, there can be humanitarian actions that complement what the obligations of the government are. I think it's hard for, in fact, it's impossible, I believe, for a government to take humanitarian action. And there's too many interests there. And so it's really, then it's necessary for there to be a separation between what money is available and how that is, what are the terms associated with that money. And so, there's greater emphasis now on pooled funds. So having pooled funds generally and locally, and that can break the separation, that can create a separation between obligation by governments and need, and that can happen. And so when we think about the future of humanitarianism, having more funds and available locally for both for governments and for local organizations, that will create a greater separation from this one colonial influence that you mentioned earlier, as well as from the transactional obligations that many governments are increasingly looking for when they're providing humanitarian aid, humanitarian.
I think yes and no. I feel like government, it depends how you look at it. Because even in these countries, in the US, you have people in California with a fire, you have a tornado. This is still humanitarian. I don't think we only attach humanitarian to international, because I think each government, they elected the people, they have the mandate to take care of their people.
They have an obligation. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's an obligation.
They have an obligation to take care of the people in need, the people who are suffering, the people who lose it. But that is an obligation. However, we also have to recognize that we all can do that with our neighbors. And I think it have to start there. And I think that I'm coming back again to like, it have to be an obligation from the government, but not only the government. And we have to be able to, I think we should even start accounting all the parts of humanity, because we don't quantify it if it's not coming with a check. We saw with COVID, putting the time to go and distribute food for my neighbor, or taking my neighbors who is 80 years old to say, let me go and do the shopping for you and bring it. This is humanitarian.
Absolutely.
But is it counting? No. Then maybe that's why I say it's become a monetarian. That is where we limit that to the piece of how much money people give. But I think we have to start accounting all the other energy and effort. And we realize that the government piece was a small piece. The bigger piece comes from each of us, all of us, and how we behave. And it's coming back again to the compassion. Like you said, Pearlie, it's about how I believe that all life have equal value, that each person, for us, all life is important, and how do we, and I think, but it's a difficult position because it's so intricate that how do you separate the politician, especially when you start going away from the border, from your territory, from your constituency, and you start moving to somebody else's constituency, then how do you eliminate your interest, political interest or economic interest from the other one as well? And that is where it's become a delicate balance.
And so what I hear you saying is actually it's almost more of a definition change that we need in order to reverse the power to the local, because there is already local humanitarian aid. We just don't consider it as such, which is almost then more of a messaging and linguistic thing. Are there other things, because you both have mentioned throughout this panel, but also in your own work, you've done a lot of work on like the power needs to be shifting to local, and we need to be encouraging localized humanitarian aid efforts. What are things that give you hope, or things that you would like to see happen that are helping humanitarian aid shift to the local more?
Mike, you can start this time.
Yeah, okay. So, I think about like this idea of like things that are happening, in terms of I almost feel like I want to talk about one other thought around moral imagination, and I feel like it's time to question this idea of providing aid, and as opposed to co-developing the aid. Valerie started off by saying that the response the responders tend not to listen, and so what if we were creating a system that started with those who are in the refugee camp, or have just been displaced, or are in the midst of a drought, and identified what their needs are first, and then gave them the power to actually develop the response themselves, instead of them being receivers of that aid, that they be the designers and the implementers themselves. And amazingly, there is capacity out there, time and time again, when local organizations do have this opportunity to respond to a crisis, when they're given the confidence that they can develop a response with 2 or 3 times their current budget, and at the time of emergency, they can deliver it. And we're seeing, organizations, whether it's the NEAR has a change fund, that they are funding local organizations within days of a crisis. And these organizations are responding quicker and with the same capacity, if not better, than the international organizations responding to the same crisis, responding to more people, because they know the context. They can forego many times an assessment because they're there, they know what's going on. And so we know that there are great examples of how local organizations have done this, and at certain scale, and that there's a greater potential out there for more change to happen. So I am encouraged, but it's that this large machinery it takes a lot to change that structure, and that's where this again, this crisis could change into an opportunity. Valerie.
Yeah, I have a lot of hope. I always looking at the optimistic way, and I think it can seems there's not enough, that we are like crazy, but I think we have enough if we put it. There's a lot of resources. There's an abundance of resources. There's an abundance of people wanted to support. There's an abundance of people compassionate. I think we have enough. That sense of enoughness for me is still there. Now, how do we bring that system where we still believe that the others, where we can value more than just not only the financial capital, but when we can value the social capital, because people are connected, when we can value the physical, like this, all that, for me, that gives me hope, because I've seen, even despite all that, the places where there's less money, I see them actually stepping up, putting their hand together, working together, and you'll see the beautiful way. How do we tap in that sense of community connectiveness, that web? How do we start? And even here in the US, when we look at the indigenous community, usually I say to people, I stop using the word poor, because the word poor is really only looking at the bank account and the financial capital, but I say moneyless. They may not have money, but they are so rich. And everybody can contribute. Everybody have something to give. And everybody have something that is need to and receive. And I think as us as humanitarians, especially here in the North, we need to start thinking that, yeah, we have a lot to give, but we have a lot to receive. And actually, if we go with that open heart to listen, we'll learn more than we think. And I usually said when I work in a lot of crises, I always feel like, yeah, I come with my knowledge, maybe the money, but I always feel that they give me more than I give to them, because they show me what is resilient. They are there, they have hope, they have dream. Despite losing everything, they are the one who welcome you, who have dream. And I think for me, that we don't have to lose that. That is the first thing that gives me hope, is that we have enough. There's enoughness, there's an abundance of resources, and we don't need to have one person having 100 billion and the other person have. No, there's enough. If we start really thinking about that, how do we bring that system of community of togetherness? That is the first thing. Second, how do we, if we go with that sense that everybody have something to contribute, then we don't see the other one who have lost maybe everything be the recipient. They are the contributor, and they know, everybody know better what they need and what because they are in that space. If you were just even asking them, checking with them, having them telling us, and then be there to support them, be there to help with maybe different perspective, because that is the second piece. It's like, how do we, and then we start evolving from there to let people design, but also local organization, local government, and then, but we need to also have a system that is we need to put ourselves as out of job in a way, because if the work is done, we become too big, we become too business, all our infrastructure become too cumbersome, and it's like the small piece, like Mike said, the reverse pyramid shape is that it's so big, the top, that the small piece there cannot be stable. And I think that if you look at it, a pyramid like this is stable, but a pyramid with the peak down cannot sustain. And that is where we are. We have to bring back, to change that pyramid, to give the more power down, and then having the top to support, because if we put an inverted pyramid, that will not be sustained. And that is the phase where we are. It was too big for the small base. And this is time to reshape that in that way.
That's good image. Good image.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image. And I think this idea of community, right, is also, it also shows to the importance of having cultural literacy, of having long-term investment, of all the reasons that we've echoed of why it's so important to empower the local, because there are simply things that you cannot do when you only come in for a crisis, right? That is just not how it works.
Just imagine somebody come to your house because they are so generous, they are the best cook ever, and they come to your house and they want to make a meal. Guess what? Do you really think they can make the best meal? Because they will have to ask you, where's the knife? Where can I? How is it? No, he can't, even if it's the Michelin star of the cooking, he will need you to guide him to, like, no, this is where you find this. If not, it will not be efficient. He will spend 3 hours or 2 days, and the food will not taste good. Sorry, I like cooking, but that is
good. That's a good one.
That we can't go to somebody at a house and expect to know where is everything and do everything for them. They'll be like, okay, what did I miss here? I'm here, it's my house. I can guide you in my house. I welcome you, but don't step on my head. It's still my house.
Yeah, I I love that image. I'm going to be using that metaphor. That's a fantastic one to be using. I want to also, because we've danced around it, but we haven't actually mentioned, you know, the cutting of USAID and US Institute of Peace. And I'm just wondering also with the, and this is a specifically US question, which I'm not from the US, so I'm always against having it be American centered, but here we are. How do you encounter the sort of attack on humanitarian aid as a whole? Has this happened before? Are there examples of resilience that we can maybe lean on to motivate us, that this is not an attack on all humanitarian aid, that this is maybe an opportunity? And also, I've been wondering a lot about how this is turning humanitarian aid partisan, and therefore making it even more of a political pursuit just because of the partisan attack on it. And if that's even an accurate thought to have, and if so, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
No, go ahead.
No, go on. You got it. Okay. So no, I think, you know, there's attacks. You know, we've heard these questioning the empathy, right? We've heard people, you know, and we are watching as civilian populations become targets in wars. I mean, you know, the big you know, coming out of World War II after the atrocities there was the protection of civilians, and really, and then that has slowly eroded until we're becoming callous to it as we're watching this. So so this idea that you know, there's almost a double speak around humanitarian, and that's why I'm concerned that when we put humanitarian affairs inside the State Department, you know, the political arm of the U.S. government, I feel that that is again diminishing the spirit of humanitarianism. And so I think, though, that yes, it is under crisis, it is under attack, but there have been moments where it's been under attack before. And, you know, we mentioned a couple of them after World War II, the genocide in Rwanda, where peacekeepers were actually watching a genocide take place. The world was not responding because it had grown tired of peacekeepers being attacked in places like Somalia, and so there's been a crisis, times of crisis in the history of humanitarianism. And so while this one is certainly a major crisis because of the amount of people that are currently in need of humanitarian aid in the world has never been greater because of climate change and because of current conflicts. So that's worrying, both for the philosophical attack as well as the diminishing of financial resources. However, because we know that there was a greater need for change and a major change to happen, this is where it could, you know, if we put the positive spin on it, this is where we can help create a different and better system.
Yeah, no, well said, Mike. I think there always have been crises for centuries, and there will be always like big peak and low peak, valley and mountain in the crisis, and change is a constant. Is this one because we are living it here today? We feel like we never had it, but when you start looking, they have been worse in the way, and but I only believe that we should not waste a good crisis, a big one, because it's an opportunity. As Mike said, it's a big opportunity for all of us. And I think in our life, as a life coach, I usually say to people, we don't grow when everything goes well. We only grow when we have been going through a big crisis or a big challenge. That is where growth comes. And I think for me, that is where I see the opportunity for us. But we have to have the courage, because in the problem in this type of time is that everybody's in a panic mode. People are losing their job, and I have to acknowledge that. People are losing their job. People are losing the livelihoods. People have family, children. And I think this is painful to see. This is hard feeling. But, and not even but, and it's also a time that it's a crisis. We have to have the courage to reflect on all of us, because we have been part of the problem in the way we're doing it. And I think it's an opportunity to, usually when you are in the stress, in the limit resources, maybe that is where we become more creative and innovative. And I see that this is a huge opportunity now for all of us to say, what can we do different? What can we do more, better with less? And because we saw the last, as Mike said when he were giving the number, in the last 10 years, the number of money put in, it's not that there was less money, double. It's have been going in exponential in the number of money. That means that there's have been money. And even if we talk about the US, it's not just the US. We saw already before even all what is going on, there was already a decline, because you cannot continue going up constantly when the system become big. It's something, like I say, is again that inverse pyramid. At one point it will crash. And we are in that season, maybe accelerated, maybe contributed, but we were in that path already. This number there was no way we would have continued in that. And we saw it already the last 5 years. There was a reduction of resources in general, because there was more need than ever. As Mike said, with the conflict, with the climate change, with the complexity, with COVID, we saw COVID, there was less and less money, because the reality of where we are then, and the population, the way we are structured, everything was already in a crisis. This has been accelerated, but how do we take advantage of it? How do we look at it as an opportunity to redesign, to rethink, to analyze ourselves as a system, and to start thinking like, okay, this maybe, yes, I'm losing my job, maybe we cut this, but probably it was not the best way to design it. And then go back to the canvas and then start rethinking the system, or reimagine it, or redesign it in a way that is a more sustainable, but also where it's include the people at the center, and they are the one who take care, because that will be a more resilient. Because guess what? Crisis will continue. There will be more. We saw the climate change. It become harder, longer, more destructive crisis. That means that we are in it for long. Then how do we get a bit more resilient?
I'm wondering, before we shift over to Q&A, because RPL is a lot about how do we ground this in lived experience and in actual tangible examples. And I know we've also been talking a lot in the abstract and naming some really key examples, but I'm wondering if this moment is a moment that invites change and possibility, and is a rupturing, perhaps for the better, despite acknowledging all the negative consequences of that rupture. What is an example that you both have seen in your career, maybe a tangible moment or something you've witnessed or been able to see, that demonstrates something you would like to see more of in the future, if this moment is that moment of change? You can take a moment to think about it, but
I think I'm just going to invoke a little bit of, the RPL method, and
always
religious literacy, and it's thinking about understanding communities and as a tool to understanding the both the power dynamics as well as the faith and the moral guidance that happens within communities. And I think, recently I was in South America for a convening of local indigenous communities that were combating climate change. And these communities, there are 30 different communities coming from all over Latin America, and meeting many for the first time, and talking about, one, identifying the problem of climate change in their communities, and then talking about what they were doing. And I think that they began every day with a prayer that grounded them with Mother Earth, and recognizing that, and then all of that respect, and vision, and thinking of the way forward in terms of solutions came generated through that, and throughout the day, and the discussions, and so this is where these communities have been dealing with problems over centuries, and they are on the front line and developing clear solutions. They don't need external forces to come in to save them or help them. They need to be, respected, and their lands need to be protected. They don't need to be polluted, and so they know what the solutions are, and they know what they need, and they can control a lot of it, unless they continue to be attacked. But I just that was like just a powerful example of where communities do know what they need, and are drivers for that, and like having the tools to recognize that. I think that's where many of the RPL methods have been very helpful in terms of understanding what that local capacity is, and I think those tools can be very helpful in support of a very localized approach.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike, for that example. I think it's a little bit more complex, because when you have the colonization type system, you have the colonized person as well. And if the person start believing that there's nothing, that they are not capable, and that they are nobody, and that they are poor, actually, that is what we have created with our system. We have created a system where some of these people stop even believe that they can do something. And I think by encouraging and pushing, and I saw in countries, some of the countries where you have the leaders, even a small community, as Mike said, or countries or provinces with the right leader who say, actually, we are capable, and I saw it. It's amazing how one person vision or mindset can change and the place. But we need to encourage you. We need to find this positive example. We need to raise that. We need to help people. And sometimes they are so shy, they don't even know they can do. But when you can start saying, no, you know better, how do you? But we need to create that space. We need to find a space where they feel like comfortable to talk to. But it's more delicate than that. It's actually complex, and we can help it by the way we frame our funding, by the way we encourage, and also time is an essence. I know humanitarian, we tend to go fast and we say, but we know the aid part is really a small piece. because we need to build system. We have a lot of technology. We can predict in advance that we didn't have many years ago. We can predict in advance when will be the flood. We can even know when the tornado come, when the cycle. All these things are there now. How do we use this technology to also start working in a system that are more resilient? How do we build, and this is the whole society approach. How do we build house? How do we, education? Do we start with school? To the primary school to have people. I think it's but we need to take it in a bigger picture where we are not yet because we have been so focused vertically to be saving the life and as a career to take money and dump in that. And one question I think I asked Mike, because when we say humanitarian, the first thing we see is aid. It's like dumping stuff to people. And I think it's not only that. It's actually when you have something, sometimes the person who come and sit with you and to say, I see you. What do you need? How do you, a place for cry? Sometimes it's as valuable as giving a bottle of oil with somebody. Sometimes it's just be there. And I think it's the whole principle, but it's challenging. It's difficult, especially when we are all in the distress in a way because there's so many things going on, there's so many crises, there's less money, the people losing their job, there's all the political noise, there's so much. It's hard. And I'm not sure we have the whole solution, but we still have to believe in humanity and the people. And the more we start putting the people affected at the center, and we have to find a way to put them there. And I think for me, that is where I saw it when you put even a small community. I've worked with some communities or some program where you start putting the person to say, hey, what do you think? They look at you, no, what do you think? I say, I don't think, I'm not there. And they look at you because you need to build trust. They need to know that you're really there to listen and not just, but it takes time. It takes effort, it takes mindset, it takes willingness. Are we ready? I'm not sure. But we need to go through that.
Yeah, and something that you're saying is it takes more than money. It takes relationships and connection and community. And a lot of people grow up in a system where they think that the best way to help is to throw money at things. And so it makes sense that when we talk about humanitarian, we talk about aid, or we talk about systems. And by both of those, we usually mean money and throwing resources. And it's what you're pointing to is it's far more than that. And it's far more centered on recognizing the humanity of people and building these long-term relationships.
But we have an opportunity to regenerate how we're doing or even starting new, but we need to be creative, we need to be innovative, we need to use the tools we have, we need to, more importantly, change our mindset. That humanitarian is about being a savior. That humanitarian is about aid. Change that mindset. That is about humanity, it's about compassion, it's about believing that the other one in the moment of need may need us, but actually they also have a say, they have a place, they can guide, and we are together, we are in it together. I think for me, that is still a big place, but it will take all of us, challenging each of us. I think, and I want for some of us who have been in it for 30 years, we have to take the step back and actually critique ourselves. I've been the most critic to say, what I did many years ago, I don't think it was the right things. I don't think we help. I think we have been part of the problem, and we need that challenge. We need to be challenged ourselves. We need to step out and thinking, this is the best opportunity we'll have in this season to actually regenerating how we have been doing business.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. I love the regenerative phrasing, and yes, I think it has to be, and I think that is really the call for the new generation and of humanitarians, and to really envision this future in a completely different way. And so I love the thought, and I encourage you to continue with it and let it grow.
That's great. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. It's given me a lot of hope, and you've both left me with a lot of things to think about. So I just want to thank you both, Mike Delaney and Valerie Bemo, for your time. I've so appreciated the conversation, and thank you to everyone at the RPL team for making this possible.
Great. Really enjoyable. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sponsor, Religion and Public Life.
Copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.